There's a moment when the air changes. It doesn't just enter and leave your lungs, it passes through you. It's in that instant that the soul perceives something in the world's machinery grinding. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. An ancient sound, a friction between the visible and the invisible, as if reality itself were trying to remember something it forgot long ago. Most don't notice. They continue laughing, shopping, loving, fighting, running, posting, all within the normality of the dream. But some, only a few, stop. They feel. And in that brief silence, something begins to tear apart inside. Carl Jung said that awakening is not a path of light, but a confrontation with the shadows that shape our perception. It's as if the individual discovers that they have lived until now in a labyrinth of mirrors, believing that each reflection was their own face. The moment they touch the glass and perceive the coldness of the reflection, a question pierces them. Who am I without the reflection of others? This question has no immediate answer. It echoes, it corrodes, it disarms. And it is in this echo that the true process of awakening begins. But look, awakening is not a heroic act. There is no glory in it. It is, in fact, a silent collapse, an implosion of the self. The people who are awakening now, those who seem to disappear, who can no longer bear empty conversations, who look at the city with a strange detachment, are not giving up. They are returning to where they should never have left, the center of themselves. They realize that the world is not only what the eyes show, but what the unconscious projects. And the unconscious, as Jung taught, is a symbolic language in constant attempt to communicate with the sleeping consciousness. However, there is a price for this encounter. When the mask falls, when the social theater dissolves, what emerges is not paradise, but emptiness, an almost unbearable silence. The one who awakens looks around and realizes they are alone. And this solitude is not a mistake. It is the gateway. The first step of individuation is exile, because only outside the crowd can the individual hear themselves. It is what Jung called the confrontation with one's own soul, a process in which everything that was certain dissolves, and what was shadow demands to be seen. Have you ever felt this? That discomfort when you realize that everyday gestures have lost their meaning, that people's words sound like echoes of an extinct language. It's the call, the seed of awareness germinating beneath the concrete of habit. It's when the world starts to seem too theatrical, too predictable, absurdly automatic. And you, in silence, begin to wonder, what lies behind the stage? There comes a moment, and it arrives for all who dare to see, when the veil is torn. Not with a bang, but with a sharp delicacy. Colors shift, voices become distant, time seems to slow down. And suddenly what was once familiar becomes strange. It is the dissolution of the collective dream. The awakening does not come with fireworks or divine revelations. It comes with the discomfort of realizing that everything that sustained your identity was made of smoke. Carl Jung wrote that what we resist persists. And that is exactly what the collective dream does. It resists. It feeds on repetition, on small distractions, on soulless conversations, on routines that seem eternal. The human nervous system, upon awakening, can no longer bear this density. The body feels before the mind understands. It is a spiritual vertigo. The soul begins to move towards the unknown, and the world, in response, tries to drag it back to sleep. There is an invisible war underway, not between people, but between states of consciousness. And this war has no flags, armies, or slogans. It takes place within each being who decides to look beyond the surface. Those who sleep call it madness. Those who awaken call it liberation. But Jung would warn us, beware of the impulse to reject the world, because even the dream, even the illusion is the raw material of transformation. The task is not to flee from the dream, but to make it conscious. Imagine that your entire life was written by an author you never met. Every desire, every fear, every choice, all guided by an invisible script. When you awaken, the author dies, and with him, the comfort of the story also dies. Only the blank page remains. This is where many give up. It's easier to return to the previous paper, resume the rehearsed speech, believe again that everything makes sense. But there are those who remain before the empty page, even trembling, even without knowing what to write. These are the ones who begin to live. Awakening is a wound that doesn't heal because it's not meant to close. It keeps open the passage between the conscious and the unconscious, between the human and the mysterious. Jung saw in this the essence of the soul, a living bridge between worlds, and when this bridge is crossed, the being is never the same again. It no longer belongs to the dream, but neither does it belong to the waking world. It inhabits the in-between space, that liminal space where the real and the symbolic touch. Some call it solitude, others initiation. The name matters little. What matters is the inner movement that begins, the slow decomposition of everything that was false. Identities begin to crumble. Desires are revealed as fabricated, truths fragile, and yet, behind it all, there is a vibrant stillness. Something observes, something has always observed. It is this silent presence, this observer, that Jung identified as the self, the true center of the psyche, the archetype of totality. It is not shaken by the collapse of the ego. On the contrary, it provokes it. Because the ego needs to shatter so that the self can emerge. And when it emerges, there is no more fear. The world remains the same, but the way of seeing it changes. Social masks continue to parade, but you see them as masks. The noises continue to scream, but there is silence within you. And then, something unexpected happens. You realize that those who disappeared, those who vanished over the edges, haven't truly gone. They've simply crossed through the mirror. They are in another kind of reality, one that isn't measured by time but by the intensity of presence. They are observing the world as one contemplates an old dream, understanding it without needing to cling to it. Perhaps that is what is happening now, at this very moment. Perhaps those who have awakened are silently reconstructing the web of reality, thread by thread, while the others still sleep. Perhaps their silence is the new language. But one question remains, and this is where things get truly unsettling. If the awakening is real, if the veil has indeed fallen, then what is the world we still see? An echo? A residue? A shadow? Or is the dream itself trying to awaken through us? Jung would say that the collective unconscious never fully sleeps. It merely dreams with different faces. Perhaps we are living one of those dreams now, and awakening will not be the end, but the beginning of another cycle of perception. If that's the case, perhaps true courage lies not in waking up, but in remaining awake within the dream. There's a moment when everything seems to crumble, not because the world has changed, but because the perspective has changed. The awakened person begins to see life with a painful clarity, as if the colors have become more real but also more raw. The automatic smiles of people on the street, the repeated dialogues in cafes, the promises on billboards, everything begins to emit the same sound, the echo of emptiness. And it is in this emptiness that something begins to move. It's not despair, it's perception. The awakened consciousness becomes capable of seeing the fear disguised as confidence, the tiredness masquerading as productivity, the despair hidden beneath routine. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Carl Jung said that every awakening is preceded by a crisis of meaning. And this crisis manifests itself in the simplest things. A man, sitting at the dinner table, suddenly realizes he no longer tastes the food he always loved. A woman, looking in the mirror in the morning, feels that the reflected image doesn't recognize her. A young person walking down the street feels that every building, every honking horn, every hurried face is part of a directionless choreography. They are small tremors, almost invisible, but enough to make the world seem like a worn-out theater. And then comes the first reaction, trying to go back to sleep. The mind says, it's just a phase, you're tired, everyone goes through this. But the soul doesn't accept the pretense. It begins to push the individual out of the scene as if saying, you saw it, now there's no going back. It is at this point that many come into conflict with their own daily lives. Conversations become unbearably superficial. Social encounters turn into rituals of exhaustion. The awakened person feels like an actor who has forgotten the script in the middle of the play. Everyone continues acting, and she, immobile, no longer knows what role to play. Imagine being at a dinner party with friends. The laughter is loud, the wine flows, the stories are repeated. Everyone seems happy. But something inside you observes from the outside. The words float in the air like fragile bubbles, and suddenly, between one joke and another, an inner silence arises, a feeling of distance that cannot be explained. You realize that everyone there is trying to prove something: success, lightness, love, control, and that beneath it all there is fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being alone, fear of facing your own inner mirror. You want to talk about it, you want to touch the reality, but you know that if you do, the atmosphere will change. The laughter will cease, the illusion will shatter, so you fall silent, you smile, and inside, you feel you are dying a little more. This is the moment when the soul begins to withdraw from the noise, not out of superiority, but out of vital necessity. Jung explained that the unconscious, as it matures, begins to reject environments that vibrate in dissonance. It's a matter of psychic survival. Being among people who insist on living inside a mask becomes as exhausting as trying to breathe underwater. Every word requires effort. Every smile demands energy. The awakened consciousness must constantly filter out the projections of others, the judgments, the guilt, the comparisons, and this invisible work drains vital force. And then a silent choice arises: to remain and empty oneself, or to leave and preserve oneself. This is where many are mistaken, confusing withdrawal with escape. But it is not escape, it is respect. It is the soul saying, enough. Jung said that individuation begins when the individual recognizes the right to be true to their own truth, even if this distances them from the group. Solitude in this context is not punishment, it is purification. It is the space where the real self begins to breathe without the weight of expectations. The awakened person at first tries to balance the two worlds. They spend the day in the familiar environment between meetings, screens, voices, and notifications, and at night they seek refuge in some silence, a solitary walk, an old song, a notebook. In this intimate space, something reconnects. Perception begins to expand to small gestures. The sound of rain on the window pane, the texture of the wind on the skin, the gaze of a stranger who for a moment seems to understand. It's as if the soul was saying, I am here, I have always been. You just remembered everything except me. But this remembrance comes at a cost. As consciousness expands, it begins to perceive how saturated the world is with unconscious mechanisms. News is crafted to generate fear. Social networks are shaped to amplify comparison. Everyday conversations revolve around guilt, shortcomings, and absences. The awakened person sees that society is organized to keep people trapped in the dream, feeding the shadow play that Jung called the collective persona, the set of social masks necessary to maintain order, but which, when absolutized, become prisons. And when she sees this, everything changes, because understanding also means losing innocence. Seeing the workings behind the illusion means renouncing the comfort of believing in it. What once seemed natural now sounds artificial. What was once simple pleasure now seems like a distraction. The awakened person begins to realize that the fights, the ideologies, the divisions are merely unconscious projections. When someone shouts, "They are the problem," they are actually trying to avoid encountering their own shadow. When someone seeks admiration, they are trying to hide a feeling of emptiness. And when someone declares themselves indignant, they are often just giving voice to a repressed part of themselves. Jung taught that what is not integrated is projected, and the modern world is, in essence, a gigantic collective projection. Awakened consciousness sees this, and that is why it can no longer engage with the same intensity. The ego, perceiving its own fragility, tries to react. You are isolating yourself too much. You need to go back to being like you were before. No one will understand you. But it's too late. The awakening cannot be undone. Then something begins to reverse. The silence, once uncomfortable, becomes a refuge. The solitude, once painful, becomes a laboratory. The awakened person learns to retreat, not as one who flees, but as one who cultivates. They begin to seek places where the air is lighter, conversations that have substance, presences that don't need masks. They discover that true companionship is not in the number of people around, but in the quality of the shared presence. One night, a man walks down an empty street. The city lights reflect in the puddles of rain. He observes the tall buildings, the illuminated windows, the distant sounds of life that goes on, and he feels a strange calm. Because he understands that the world hasn't changed, it was he who began to see. Each lit light is a symbol, each hurried face, an unconscious story. He smiles. For the first time in a long time, he feels neither anger nor guilt, only compassion. He understands that everyone is sleeping because they couldn't yet bear to see, and it is in that instant that true love is born, not romantic or pious love, but the kind that recognizes that everything is part of the same process. Jung called this reconciliation with the shadow. Awakening is not about rejecting the world, but seeing it without illusions. It is about being conscious within the dream, knowing that it is a dream and yet participating lucidly. When this point is reached, the individual ceases to fight against the collective sleep. He simply observes. He acts when necessary, remains silent when the noise grows, and continues the invisible work of remaining awake. And then comes the second shock, realizing that awakening is not the end, but the beginning of a journey. The veil has fallen, but there are many other veils behind it. Reality, like a mirror within another mirror, reveals increasingly subtle layers. The awakened person feels a new calling, something profound, almost unnameable, an impulse that invites them to traverse their own unconscious, no longer to escape the dream, but to discover who is dreaming. The world around us remains the same: cars, voices, promises, news. But now, behind it all, there is a murmur. It is the collective unconscious whispering, "There is more." And this voice is irresistible. It leads the soul to the next stage, the one in which consciousness not only observes the dream, but begins to create within it. It is there, on that threshold between the visible and the invisible, that the journey deepens. And that's where we're going now. At first, the disappearance is almost imperceptible. You simply feel an exhaustion without a clear cause, an internal saturation with everything that previously seemed normal. The mind tries to justify it. It's just tiredness. You need a vacation. This will pass, but the soul knows. Something inside you has come loose from the machine. You begin to observe life from the outside, like someone waking up in the middle of a movie, and realizing that the characters are still acting without noticing that the script has ended. And it is at this point that the most difficult decision arises, choosing between continuing to act or accepting the silence that comes after the last line. Carl Jung said that the greatest danger of awakening is not madness, but isolation. Because by seeing what others don't see, you inevitably distance yourself. But this distancing is not rejection. It's the purification of perception. You begin, without intending to protest, to abandon the stages of unconsciousness. Social media is the first to fall. You realize you can no longer feed on it. The endless scrolling reveals itself as a collective trance, a choreography of comparison and vanity where every gesture is a plea for validation. The awakened gaze sees not people, but fragments, shadows trying to prove they exist. And then you switch off. The silence that follows is deafening, but it's a pure, unprecedented sound. Time suddenly regains its form. You realize there are hours that didn't exist before, spaces that were invisible. It's as if the very air has become breathable again. But this liberation brings a strange feeling of nakedness. Who are you without the reflection of others? What remains when all eyes turn away? Have you ever wondered who's watching when no one is watching you? It is at this point that the disappearance deepens. You begin to leave the groups, the circles, the gatherings. There are no dramatic breakups, no long explanations. You simply stop showing up, and the world, too busy with its own noise, hardly notices. People interpret your silence as disinterest, when in fact it is the opposite. It is respect. Respect for what is too true to be said. You realize that many relationships were not connections, but unconscious contracts, pacts of mutual support of roles, masks that fit perfectly while everyone remained asleep. When one wakes up, the agreement breaks. Absence begins to hurt others, but not you. For the first time, silence is nourishment. You find yourself walking the streets with a different kind of gaze, more lingering, more sensitive. Details gain strength, the dust dancing in the beam of light, the distant sound of a bell, the anonymous face that crosses yours and seems, for a moment, to recognize something in you. Everything vibrates with a hidden meaning, as if the world were an ancient language being understood again. But there's a night when the weight falls. Physical disappearance is easy, psychological disappearance is not. Memories of the old self try to rise again. The body, accustomed to attention, feels withdrawal. You find yourself trying to go back, opening apps again, writing messages, searching for a familiar voice. But what returns is emptiness. The conversation seems superficial, the words artificial. You realize there's no going back. The old self is dead, but the new one hasn't been born yet. And then comes the question that cuts through everything. What exists between the end and the beginning? That's when the process becomes alchemical. Jung described this interval as black and the dark night of the soul. It is the period in which everything loses meaning, but consciousness remains alive, observing. It is the necessary decomposition of the ego so that something more authentic can emerge. The awakened person enters this stage with fear but also with fascination. There is a strange beauty in destruction, a purity in nothingness. You begin to understand that disappearance is not escape, but dissolution, the transformation of the lead of the persona into the gold of presence. In the silence, you discover what you never knew, that you weren't truly with anyone before, only playing roles that touched each other on the surface. True connection, as Jung said, happens when one consciousness meets another, and that's rare. Amidst the sleeping crowd, you were invisible. Now, in solitude, you finally see yourself. It's a brutal but liberating realization. What if what you call loneliness is actually the beginning of a deeper connection? In the following days, reality seems to reorganize itself. Time stretches, sleep deepens, dreams become symbolic. You begin to realize that dream images are speaking to you. Jung said that the unconscious uses metaphors to teach what the rational mind cannot understand. And that's how the waking world begins to seem like a dream, and the dream a revelation. A woman dreams that she walks on a river of mirrors. A man dreams that he talks to a child he never had. None of this is literal. It's the unconscious trying to piece together the new meaning that is emerging. You start seeing signs everywhere, a word that repeats itself, a number that keeps appearing, a coincidence that seems like an answer. The rational mind tries to dismiss it, but the soul recognizes the pattern. The waking world and the inner world begin to overlap. The invisible becomes visible, but something unsettling happens. When the true self begins to emerge, the world reacts. People distance themselves, opportunities disappear, doors close. The universe seems to conspire against your growth, but it's not punishment, it's purification. Jung explained that the collective unconscious tries to neutralize any consciousness that threatens to disrupt the balance of shadows. It's the self-preservation instinct of the collective dream. Therefore, the more awakened you become, the more the world will try to convince you that you are wrong. Have you ever noticed how the world rewards those who sleep well and punishes those who wake up? Withdrawal then becomes an act of courage. You begin to live more simply but also more intensely. Small gestures become sacred, lighting a candle, preparing a meal, breathing slowly. You learn to hear the sound of your own presence. Solitude transforms into a temple. The soul, once scattered, becomes concentrated. Silence, once uncomfortable, becomes an interlocutor, and in this intimate space, something begins to speak, not with words, but with impressions. A silent intelligence, as if the unconscious itself had begun to teach. Carl Jung would call this an encounter with the self, the higher consciousness that observes the transient ego. And when this encounter happens, the disappearance is complete, because you no longer need to be seen. When external recognition loses its meaning, inner reflection becomes sufficient. You stop seeking approval and begin to feel communion. And this communion is the opposite of isolation. It's realizing that there is something in everything that breathes, in everything that exists, and that this something also breathes within you. But there is one last mystery. When the individual disappears from the world, what does the world see in his place? Perhaps disappearance isn't absence, but transparency. You don't vanish. You become invisibly present. You're in the same place, but you no longer belong to the same frequency. While the world stirs with noise, you vibrate in silence. And from this silence, paradoxically, a new form of presence is born. People who meet you feel peace without knowing why. Children look at you with curiosity. Animals approach. Something in you has changed the vibration of the air. And then, for the first time, you understand the true meaning of awakening. It's not about leaving the world, it's about becoming conscious of it from within. Disappearance is not escape, it's integration. You withdraw to return different, no longer as an actor, but as a mirror. But there's something no one told you. The process isn't over yet. Because there's another level of disappearance, deeper, more subtle, one where even the idea of awakened self begins to dissolve. And that's where the part that Jung himself would call the final mystery of the soul begins. Are you ready to cross it? There is an inevitable and silent moment when the soul decides to close itself off from the world in order to finally hear it. It is a natural retreat, like the sea receding before returning with multiplied force. Awakening demands this withdrawal, and whoever tries to resist it ends up shattering between what they were and what they are becoming. The hermit phase, as Carl Jung called it in his symbolic metaphor of individuation, is not an aesthetic or mystical choice. It is a biological process of the soul. The spirit needs silence in the same way that the body needs sleep. Without this time of shadow and regeneration, there is no metamorphosis. At first, hermetism seems like a disappearance. You cancel appointments, avoid invitations, leave messages unanswered. The world interprets this as disinterest, but it's something else. It's listening. For the first time, you begin to hear the sound of your own thoughts, without the constant echo of others' opinions. You begin to realize that your old decisions were responses to external noise, not internal impulses. That much of what you called life was merely reaction. Now in the silence, the essential question arises: what is truly mine? And what in you is merely an inheritance from ancient voices? In this space of seclusion, the senses transform. The silent house begins to speak. The walls hold memories. The objects gain presence. You find an old notebook and discover phrases you wrote years ago without understanding, but which now seem like messages from a future self. You observe the sky for entire minutes, something you haven't done since childhood, and notice that it also observes you. The hours pass slowly. Time becomes dense, almost tactile. The mind, previously saturated with stimuli, begins to clear like a fogged window. It's uncomfortable at first. Emptiness always is. But there's a beauty in the lack of distractions, as if the inner world finally has space to breathe. One night, you dream that you are walking through a forest that grows in a spiral. The trees seem to pulsate as if breathing. In the center, there is a mirror buried in the ground. You clean it with your hands and see your own face, but the reflection flickers, changes shape, dissolves. When you wake up, you feel the echo of the dream vibrating. Jung would explain, the mirror is the symbol of consciousness, and the forest, the unconscious. The soul is showing you that it is time to look at yourself, but without clinging to the image. The true self is not the reflection, it is the one who observes the reflection. Have you ever had the feeling of being watched by something inside yourself? Prolonged solitude begins to reveal not only peace, but also ghosts, the inner shadows. Those parts of yourself that have always been ignored return one by one, demanding recognition. Fear, jealousy, anger, pride, resentment, all present themselves as old guests who have never been heard. It is an inevitable confrontation. Jung said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And this darkness, in retreat, becomes almost palpable. You feel the weight of inherited guilts, of pains that are not yours, of beliefs you held onto only out of fear of being alone. But little by little something changes. The shadows, when heard, begin to dissolve. They don't want to punish you. They want to be understood. They want to return to the wholeness from which they were exiled. The unconscious is not an enemy, it is a reservoir of vital energy. When you integrate it, you feel a force arise. Not a force of domination, but of presence. It's like turning on a light in a room that has been locked for centuries. What was once fear becomes understanding. What was once shame transforms into compassion. What if all pain was just a form of memory trying to be transformed? The seclusion deepens. You begin to lose your sense of linear time. The days seem to blend into a sequence of states of consciousness. Each morning you wake up feeling different, as if an old part of you has been replaced by something new during sleep. It's common for vivid dreams to repeat themselves, or for strange phenomena to occur. Clocks that stop, devices that malfunction, lights that flicker for no reason. It's not supernatural. It's symbolic. The unconscious, in reorganizing itself, affects the field of perception. The external world begins to reflect the internal world. Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that cannot be explained by causality, but by meaning. One day, for example, you think of someone you haven't seen in years, and they send you a message, or you hear a word that perfectly sums up how you feel, spoken by a stranger, or you dream of a situation that days later happens. These are small cracks in the wall between the visible and the invisible. The hermit learns to recognize these signs as compasses of the self, pointing the way to integration. But there is a point where silence becomes dangerous. When the ego tries to appropriate awakening, a new kind of trap arises, that of believing oneself to be beyond others. It is a subtle but fatal error. True consciousness does not exalt itself. It dissolves. Jung warned that the spiritual ego is the last obstacle to individuation, the moment when the seeker confuses clarity of vision with the possession of truth. Therefore, eremitism requires constant vigilance. Humility is the bridge between light and lucidity. Have you ever noticed how spiritual pride is merely a disguised shadow of wisdom? The hermit phase lasts as long as necessary. Some spend weeks, others years. There are curious accounts of people who, during periods of isolation, develop improbable perceptions, sensations of expanding space around them, symbolic visions, synesthesia between sound and color. Jung recorded similar phenomena in patients in states of profound transformation, not as delirium, but as the language of the unconscious trying to manifest itself. The hermit, by immersing himself in himself, crosses subtle boundaries of reality. It is not uncommon that, after long periods of solitude, an almost supernatural clarity about life events emerges, a kind of intuition that seems to see before something happens. But what is most surprising is that the deeper the dive, the simpler existence becomes. The hermit begins to value the small gesture, the anonymous detail. He feeds on presence, not on stimulation. Hot coffee, the sound of rain, the smell of paper, everything becomes sacred. Life slows down to the point where each instant reveals itself as infinite. And paradoxically, it is when he accepts isolation that he ceases to feel alone. Solitude transforms into an invisible communion with all that exists. And then comes the turning point, the call to return. After months, perhaps years of silence, something inside you begins to pulse at a different frequency. It's no longer a desire to return to the world, it's the world itself calling you back. People reappear. Invitations arise, situations repeat themselves, but now you see them differently. Your strengthened consciousness no longer fears the collective confusion. You understand that you are not here to escape humanity, but to be consciously present within it. The hermit begins to descend from the mountain. Upon returning, everything seems the same, but nothing is. The familiar voices, the old routines, the familiar noises, everything sounds like a distant echo. You feel like a stranger in your own home. But there is also a new kind of serenity, You realize you can be among the sleeping without falling asleep. You can participate without getting lost. You can listen without absorbing. This is the mark of the border dweller, one who walks between two worlds carrying a light that needs no proclaim. Carl Jung said that he who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens. But perhaps true awakening is being able to look outside. After having looked inward and yet remaining awake, the hermit returns with a new mission, to live so fully that his own life becomes a mirror for those who are still asleep. And here arises the final paradox of this stage. Upon returning, you realize that there is no real difference between the inside and the outside. The world is a mirror of the unconscious, and each person, each event, each encounter is a symbolic message. The separation was merely a necessary illusion for consciousness to see itself. Now it recognizes itself in everything. But something stirs again, a deeper invitation, an older mystery. The returning hermit feels a new calling, not to the world, but through it. There is something beyond individual awakening, something that begins to insinuate itself on the horizon of the soul, a kind of consciousness that belongs neither to the self nor to the collective, a presence that observes everything, but is neither part of it. What happens when the awakened one begins to disappear even from himself? The answer lies beyond words. It is what is to come. It is what awaits on the next journey. There comes a moment when disappearance ceases to be a choice and becomes destiny. You don't run from the world. It's the world that slowly recedes, like a stage set dissolving when the show ends. The lights dim, the sound of the crowd fades, and the stage, once full of movement, is now empty. The silence that remains is so vast it seems infinite, but contrary to the fear you imagined feeling, there is peace. A peace that doesn't come from security, but from truth. The dream is over, and for the first time, you are awake. The awakened gather in silence. There are no leaders, no promises, no speeches. They meet in small, secluded houses, in forests, mountains, beaches, forgotten villages. Some live alone, others in discreet communities, but all share the same unspoken pact: to preserve lucidity. They communicate with gestures, with glances. They speak little, feel much. When they cross paths, there is a kind of immediate recognition. They don't need to explain themselves. They are like travelers who have returned from the same dream and now walk through a more transparent reality. And yet, something begins to stir beneath this calm, a feeling that the silence is about to break. Because even among the awake, the world still pulsates. The news continues, the noise grows, the collective chaos intensifies. Global unconsciousness seems to react to the emergence of these small pockets of clarity, as if the dream itself were aware that it is being undone. It is at this point that the unexpected happens. Have you ever had the feeling that reality is starting to respond to your thoughts? Coincidences become more frequent, synchronicities accumulate, and time seems to lose its linearity. People report identical dreams in different places. Objects appear and disappear. The boundaries between the visible and the invisible begin to dissolve. Carl Jung would call this an intensification of the psychic field, a state in which the collective unconscious reacts to the expansion of individual consciousness. The external and internal worlds cease to be opposites and become mirrors of each other. There are curious accounts among the awakened. One woman recounts spending hours gazing at the sea and for a moment having the distinct sensation that the ocean was breathing with her. A man claims to have heard the sound of his own name coming from the wind, with no one around. A small child, the daughter of one of the silent ones, begins to draw symbols reminiscent of ancient alphabets. Impossible things happen naturally, and no one tries to prove anything, they simply observe, because they understand that the impossible is only what has not yet been remembered. But along with the expansion comes tension. The sleeping world begins to feel the disappearance of the lucid ones. The system misses those who no longer participate in the game. Suddenly, there are questions. Why did you disappear? Why aren't you answering? Are you okay? The collective sleep tries to pull you back with ties of worry, guilt, and duty. It is at this moment that the final test presents itself. Managing to remain awake even when called by the dream. Can you love the world without losing yourself in it? Tension is rising. News is becoming more alarming. Fear is spreading with renewed force. Polarization is intensifying. It's as if the unconscious is screaming, trying to stifle any trace of lucidity. Those who are awake perceive what is happening. The collective, unknowingly, is reacting to the light that is beginning to spread at the edges. Jung would write that the shadow, when confronted, struggles to survive. It fears disappearing. And that is precisely what is at stake: the dissolution of the old world of projections, masks, and pretenses. But here's the twist: the collective awakening doesn't begin with crowds, but with silent vibrations. Consciousness doesn't impose itself, it's contagious. Little by little, ordinary people begin to feel the same restlessness. Workers, students, mothers, artists, everyone feels that something no longer fits. It's a spiritual fever. They can't explain it, but they begin to question everything. And without knowing it, they too begin to awaken. The circles of lucid minds are growing. One encounter leads to another. One glance awakens another. Suddenly, there is an invisible network of awakened people scattered across the world, connected without needing to speak. It's not an organization, it's an organism. And the more they expand, the more the fabric of reality seems to tighten. Humanity is being pushed toward a new stage of perception, a new way of existing. But the process is turbulent. The transformation of consciousness is always accompanied by chaos. The old tries to resist. The new is yet to take shape. Dreams become intense. Emotions fluctuate. External structures collapse. There are days of pure clarity and others of profound confusion. You feel fear, but also a certainty. Something bigger than you can comprehend is happening. And this certainty is the thread that guides you through the labyrinth. Carl Jung said that the soul has a natural movement towards wholeness, and that this movement is irresistible. No matter how much the individual tries to return to sleep, there is something inside that pushes them forward, towards integration. It's like an underground river leading each of us to the same ocean. Even those who are still asleep are being carried along. Awakening is not a moral choice. It is an evolutionary process of the collective psyche. But something extraordinary happens when the number of awakened beings reaches an invisible point of equilibrium. It's as if a subtle shift passes through the air. The weight of the world seems lighter, the colors more vivid, the encounters more meaningful. Synchronicity intensifies to the point of absurdity. Suddenly, a thought manifests the instant it is felt. An intention is realized before it is spoken. The separation between inside and outside disappears completely. Dream and waking merge into a single field of consciousness. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to live in a world where thought and reality are the same thing? But before this stabilizes, there is one last resistance, a final movement of the collective shadow. A wave of noise, fear, and misinformation covers the world, as if the dream itself were trying to erase the memory of waking. Everything seems to suddenly worsen. And many believe that the light has failed. But it's the opposite. It's a sign that the process is at its peak. Before the dawn, there is always the densest darkness. Those who are awakened know this. They remain steadfast, silent, even when everything seems to crumble. They gather not to argue, but to support. The work is now internal, but its effects spread throughout the human field. Each person who remains awake creates a zone of stability around them. It's like a lit candle in the midst of a storm, small but inextinguishable. And there are many candles now, so many that the darkness begins to recede. And then, without announcement, without prophecy, something changes. The general noise begins to dissipate. Fear loses its power. A new kind of calm settles in, first in a few, then in many. It is the beginning of the return. Humanity begins to remember what it had forgotten, that it has always been part of consciousness, that it has never been separate from reality. Carl Jung would write that the collective unconscious is like a forest that awakens with the sunrise. During the night, each tree believes itself to be alone, but when the light arrives, the entire forest becomes apparent. This is what is beginning to happen now. The light does not come from outside, it ignites within each one of us. And suddenly, dream and awakening cease to be opposites. They are the same field, the same movement, the same breath, but there is still a mystery, because when everyone awakens, what remains for the awakened? Perhaps the next step is not waking up from the dream, but learning to dream it consciously. Perhaps the world doesn't need to be abandoned, but reinvented from the inside out. Perhaps awakening is just the prelude to something even greater, a consciousness capable of creating realities with the same power with which it once created illusions. And that's where the journey becomes dangerous again, because whoever creates without knowing their shadow repeats the same dream with new disguises. That's why Jung would say, true awakening begins when the awakened one realizes that they too need to transcend themselves. Are you ready to disappear even from your own waking hours? The answer lies ahead, in the final crossing, where silence will become word, and the word, creation. That is where we are going. That is what awaits us in the last part. At the end of every journey of awakening, there is a moment of silence so profound that it seems to contain the sound of all truths. It is the moment when the soul, weary of fighting against the noise, simply surrenders to its own clarity. There is no more searching, no more escape, only the recognition that everything that has been lived, every pain, every loss, every disappointment, was part of a single movement, the return to oneself. The metamorphosis ends without fanfare, without brilliance, without witnesses. And yet, it is the most magnificent event of existence. Carl Jung said that the awakened individual is the one who has finally understood that their task is not to change the world, but to become whole. This silent wholeness is what transforms everything around them, not by imposition, but by presence. Awakening is not an endpoint, it is the beginning of another way of living, more lucid, more sensitive, more real. When you arrive here, you understand that the true revolution does not happen en masse, but within each consciousness that decides to stop acting. You begin to see life as a fertile field of subtle choices. With each gesture, a seed. With each thought, a vibration. Work, love, free time, everything becomes an expression of the same purpose, to live in coherence with what is true. And it is here that the journey ceases to be contemplation and becomes action. Not impulsive action, but conscious, silent, almost invisible yet transformative action. The world remains noisy, but now the noise no longer dominates you. The voices that once dragged you down now sound distant. You observe without getting lost, participate without being contaminated. It's like being inside a storm, but with the eye of the hurricane within you. What once frightened you now strengthens you. What once seemed like chaos is now just energy in motion. Clarity becomes your compass, and silence your home. But a new responsibility arises. Because seeing clearly implies acting consciously, every thought is a choice between perpetuating the dream or strengthening the awakening. Every word is a mirror. Every attitude is a seed sown in the collective field of the human psyche. Jung taught that every individual unconscious is a living cell within the collective unconscious, and this means that every small personal transformation echoes in the consciousness of all humanity. Have you ever wondered how much power lies in your silence? Because it is no longer the shout that changes the world, but the vibration of presence. It is not imposition, but coherence. It is not discourse, but example. Those who are awake do not need to convince anyone. It is enough to exist in truth. It is enough to live without betraying one's own soul. It is this kind of life that begins to alter the invisible field in which the collective sleeps. And that's how the new begins, from the inside out. One awakened person decides to stop lying to themselves, then another, until, without fanfare, the collective lie begins to lose its power. The theater empties not out of protest, but due to a lack of actors. The old world falls not through revolution, but through disinterest. The system that fed on unconsciousness starves to death when consciousness ceases to serve it. But what comes after that? Here comes the simple, the everyday rediscovered, life in its purest form, the taste of water, the touch of a breeze, the sincere gaze of a stranger. The awakened discover that the extraordinary has always been in the ordinary. It was only obscured by noise. Enlightenment is not a distant state. It is the recognition that the miracle has always been in every instant. Now, with your consciousness awakened, you become what Jung called border dweller, someone who walks between two worlds, the old still decaying and the new still gestating. Their mission is not to choose between them, but to be the bridge, to teach by example, to inspire through silence, to illuminate without seeking to shine. And this inspiration can be practical. It begins with small acts, waking up a few minutes earlier to breathe in silence, observing your own thoughts before reacting, saying no when something hurts your integrity, listening to someone without trying to correct them, making your work an expression of who you are, not a disguise, creating, writing, painting, speaking, but always from the center, never from behind a mask. The world needs people who do simple things consciously, because when simple things are done with presence, the invisible changes shape. Awakening, then, ceases to be an ideal and becomes a daily practice. You begin to recognize the shadow before it dominates you. You learn to laugh at old illusions without despising them. You understand that duality is not a mistake, but a school. Good and evil, pain and pleasure, sleep and waking, all are part of the same cycle, the cycle of the expansion of consciousness. And when this is understood, fear dissolves. Carl Jung would say that individuation, the process of becoming whole, culminates in a return to humanity. Not a return to the old chaos, but to true communion. The awakened one returns not as a missionary, but as a mirror. Their presence becomes an invitation. Their way of life, a silent reminder that it is possible to exist in another way. And here's the most important point. You don't need to disappear completely to be true. The world needs you lucid within it. It needs your calm voice amidst the shouting. It needs your gentleness where there is harshness. It needs your honesty where there is fear. Consciousness is not escape. It is lucid participation. The work now is to remain awake within the dream, to create within it, to act within it, to transform from within. You can start now. Turn off the noise for a few minutes. Breathe. Observe without judgment. Feel what is alive within you. Ask yourself, honestly, what is still real? What is still mine? And what is merely inheritance, performance, habit? The answers will not come from outside. They will rise from the depths, like ancient waters waiting for the right moment to emerge. Allow yourself to start over. Allow yourself to truly exist, even if it means losing applause. Allow yourself to act consciously, even if the world doesn't understand. Life doesn't need to be a spectacle. It needs to be an experience. And it is this authentic and silent experience that changes everything. You are not alone on this path. There are many of us walking together, even if in silence. We are an invisible network of awakened consciousnesses, scattered throughout the world, sustaining the vibration of lucidity. And every time you choose truth, this network strengthens. Every real gesture you make is a spark that helps the collective remember itself. So if this message resonated with you, if something within you awakens as you read these words, make it a milestone. Write in the comments, even anonymously, "I am no longer an actor." Write as if sealing a pact with your own soul. It's a simple but symbolic gesture, a call to return to authenticity. And if this space has brought you clarity, if the words you found here have ignited something that was dormant, subscribe to the channel. Not out of obligation, but out of connection. This is a refuge for those who want to stay awake amidst the noise. Use the like button not as an automatic gesture, but as a silent sign of recognition, a nod of awareness to others who are also waking up. Comment, share, participate, but do it all with the same intention with which you breathe: conscious, present, true. Because by doing this, you're not just helping this channel grow, you're helping consciousness stay alive in the world. Remember, you're not disappearing, you're just stopping the pretense. And in doing so, you're allowing the world to finally wake up.